Hi folks, thanks for joining us as we dive into the pile of shame as I pull out a kit and hoping to build it and paint it in one day. For this episode I've chosen the Razorback kit from Citadel Miniatures. This is an updated kit from the release in the mid-90s that Games Workshop did to introduce the Razorback to the universe. Using the MacGuffin of a newly discovered STC by the Adeptus Mechanicus, Games Workshop were able to explain this newly discovered variant of the Rhino. The Rhino chassis was used at this point for the majority of the Space Marines' armoured vehicles, including the Vindicator, Predator and Whirlwind. The Razorback gives the Marines an infantry fighting vehicle capability comparable to modern machines such as the US Bradley or the British Warrior IFV, sacrificing troop carrying capacity for increased firepower and increased armour as well. The Rhino chassis has also been used for a number of variants which no official models were ever produced for, such as the Sabre Tank Hunter and later the Hunter anti-aircraft tank, which I believe has seen releases from the potentially the Forge World range and certainly in the Epic Armageddon universe, although my knowledge on this is slightly rusty. The modularity of the Rhino chassis is really well documented, and there's been several Golden Demon award-winning and well-renowned conversions floating around for decades now. I've got particular nostalgia for some of the early Imperial Guard iterations of the Rhino, because back in the Rogue Trader and first edition 40k days there wasn't separate vehicles between the Imperial Guard and the Space Marines, so Imperial Guard were often seen driving around in Rhinos and Land Raiders, so some of the conversions that we saw in that era were pretty inspirational. There's quite a few that adorned with extra stowage and mine flails, that kind of thing, and I'd be quite keen on recreating something similar with this model. In this video I've captured everything from the unboxing through to the build and the painting, however I've sped up the footage for the sake of time. I certainly wouldn't label this video as a how to build a Rhino chassis kit because I probably make a few mistakes along the way, as well as doing a lot of stuff on the fly, especially when it comes to converting and magnetising, so I'm sure there's probably better guides out there if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. The model itself's pretty straightforward to build and the instructions are really clear. It's definitely got more of a chunkiness to it and weight than the original Rhino chassis. Games Workshop have been pretty generous as well with this in terms of the amount of options that you can build out of the box, so it comes with the option to make it as a Rhino, or as you probably purchased it as intended for the Razorback, but it gives you the additional doors etc if you wanted to swap it out for a Rhino if you were playing a game and maybe didn't have the points for the Razorback or just wanted some extra options, which is pretty nice. I think that's the same goes for all of the Rhino based kits, so the Predator and the Whirlwind and Vindicator all come with the parts just to make it into generic Rhino, which we'll be exploiting a little bit of later. Again, this video is definitely not a do as I do type video. I've more or less used the tools and supplies I had on hand at the time, so when I reached for the poly cement, as this kit probably deems, being a plastic kit, that'd be the right tool to use. It seems it evaporated in the time it had taken me to get back to using it, so in this case I've just used super glue, which works fine. It doesn't weld the plastic in the same way, so you will end up with gaps unless you're diligent with your sanding and filing. Again, something that I probably could have taken to a bit more of a higher standard, but in order to get this built, painted and converted in one day, I probably cut a few corners, but I think the results end up being fairly decent, something I'm quite happy with. So as you can see, after finishing the initial construction of the hull, I've primed everything in GW's Rhinox hide, which is a dark armour brown. Vallejo armour brown would probably be the equivalent. This is just brushed on. I didn't really fancy breaking out the airbrush for this project. The rest of the units in the army so far I've done have been hand painted or brush painted, so just trying to keep that consistent, and also the results are pretty fast and decent. There's quite a lot of weathering goes on with these, so a lot of the airbrushing would probably be lost to that. In saying that, I have used the airbrush to great effect during the summer on quite a few bolt action miniatures, German armour etc. It really lends itself well to that kind of thing, doing big flat surfaces and transitions. It's really nice. So the next stage here is just to clip everything else off the sprue for all the modular items. I'm just going to build everything and paint it with the option of using it if required. Everything that I can magnetise I will. I've also had a little raid of the bits box at this point and pulled out some likely looking parts which I want to use on this. So the Razorback kit itself actually comes with some additional stowage that the Rhino kit doesn't, which is quite cool. So it comes with a tow cable and toolboxes, fuel canisters, that kind of thing. But I've also scavenged which looks like a Tamiya fuel barrel, as well as some parts from the British Boat Action Universal Carrier kit, which is like a tarp and an extra toolbox. I've also grabbed some sandbags from a plaster kit that I bought off of eBay a long time ago. It came with like all sorts of kind of battlefield debris and things like that. To secure the barrel on the back, or to make it look secured on the back, I've used a piece of chain jewellery which was fit for the bin, so I grabbed hold of that, and I used that for representing something that's holding this barrel down rather than just floating there. I've also got hold of a wire trace for fishing. You could use something like guitar string as well, would probably do the trick, just as an additional aerial, as I do see this vehicle as being used as maybe like a kind of long range recon, kind of home away from home for its inhabitants. Yeah, I think it helps to sell the authenticity of the kit bash, the conversion, if there's almost a reason for everything being there. So that's why the fuel canister's there, that's why there's the additional stowage, is because I'm expecting this vehicle to be out in the field for the entirety of an operation, and probably relaying back information back to headquarters, as well as providing fire support for the troops that are being carried in it. I should probably mention I don't actually play 40k. I've kind of dabbled in years gone by, but for the most part I used to play Epic Space Marine right through to the release of 40k in 1997, at which point I kind of fell away from the hobby a bit. So I'm not really basing this conversion on anything in the rules as such, and later on you'll see that I build some additional modules for the Rhino chassis, including like an anti-aircraft defense system and a support mortar, which I don't believe there's any rules for it in the codexes at the moment. But what I do intend on doing is using these models for the one-page rules Grimdark Future rule set, which is kind of freely available. It's definitely worth checking out. I've backed to Patreon just to get hold of additional stuff, such as the points calculator, which allows you then to cost up your own units to build your own forces. So I dare say that I could probably add in costings for any of these variants that I build out of this kit, which is really nice. In the video now I'm just applying base coat of Castellan Green across the whole model. So it's a base paint from GW, pretty high pigmentation. I'm layering it on straight out of the pot, which I'm sure is making a lot of people cringe, but it gives decent coverage, it dries really quickly. It's overall just a really nice paint to use, and it forms the basis of most of my olive drab stuff. Once that's dried, I'll start to mix in a little bit more of the Deathworld Forest, which is another olivey base paint from GW, and using that in combination with the Castellan Green allows me to start doing highlights. And then once I'm finished with the green, I grab out some Mechanicus Standard Grey, which is the kind of base tone grey, another base paint from GW, and that's used for the tracks. I think in the next model, the Predator, I actually move on to using Eshin Grey or Vallejo Anthracite Grey, whichever I've got closer to hand. It's more of a dark grey, and I think it suits the tracks a little bit better, but as these are going to get washed down and weathered after the fact, it doesn't massively matter too much which is used. And for the sandbags I'm using Deathclaw Brown, which is a layer paint from GW, and it goes on quite thinly. And again, I think in hindsight, doing the sandbags again, I'd have probably went for something with a bit more coverage, probably starting off with like a Mournfang Brown and then working up through to Deathclaw Brown, and later on highlighting with a Shabty Bone. At the end of the model, the sandbags come out a little bit translucent or transparent, and yeah, I'm not massively happy with the results, but you know, it's a sandbag. So once all the base coats are done, we're on to bringing the model to life with some decals. So I stayed away from the decals that came in the box, as they're the kind of generic Space Marine and Ultramarine armor decals. The kind of aesthetic that I'm going for is maybe something a little bit more grounded in reality here, so it's a little bit more like something you might see in the world of Alien with the US CM or Starship Troopers, or even something you might expect to see in World War II or up to the modern era. So I've used a lot of decals from other kits, including some of the bolt action British ones, and what I think is a Tamiya Japanese Type 90 tank for the kind of larger decals. I've also used some of the ones from the Adeptus Titanicus kits, the modern ones, 2018 release, as the I think it's Legio Astorum and Legio Gryphonicus. Ones are actually quite fitting. There's the kind of Griffin iconography and the chest piece iconography, which I think blends in quite well with this type of look I'm going for. So I've used quite a few of those. You can see there that I flash up a Redemptor Dreadnought that I painted recently, and that was the starting point for this new army and this aesthetic I was going for. As you can see, it's painted in the same sort of scheme. It's got a little bit more weathering done to it, a little bit more blending of the greens than I eventually achieved with the Razorback and the Predator, but it still fits alongside it quite well. And again, you can see the decals I've used on it match up with the ones that I'm using here, just to tie everything together. And once all the decals are applied and I've let the kind of water that I set them with dry, I go back over them with some Lamium medium or Vallejo matte medium would also do the trick, and that just sets them in place, and kind of blends in the ghosting effect that you normally get with decals. Again, I believe using things like decal set and decal softener probably does a better job of this, but it's really just, again, what I've got on hand at the time to use, and I've never really found an issue with it. It definitely does the trick. So after that's done and all the decals are applied and set, just finish off with some detail work doing the lenses. So the lenses are done with a base coat of Wild Rider Red from GW, and then that's kind of highlighted along the bottom with a little bit of white mixed in, just to give a kind of pinky effect. And then the top right, or the opposite corner, is dotted with a little bit of white, and that helps sell the effect of a bit of lens glare. And once that's dried, I go over the top of that with a bit of GW Ard coat, or any other gloss brush on paint that you have to hand, and that kind of helps again with the reflectiveness of it. And then it's on to the last of the base coat painting, which is the gun barrels, which are done with Abaddon black and a little bit of lead belcher mixed in, just to differentiate them. For the most part, everything's kind of olive, and I'm doing that partially out of laziness, but also basing it on real world stuff. So you'll tend to find that a lot of the armour used from World War II through to the modern age, it tends to be, everything's painted in the same colour and everything gets coated in it. So there's not that massive difference in the colour of gun barrels, etc., that you might expect to see, or you might be more used to seeing from sci-fi or media point of view. Which I get the aesthetic of doing that, and it does break up the model a little bit and draws the attention. But if you're going for sort of realism, then it might not be the way to go. So once all the base coats are applied, the next stage is to wash it. So again, here I would have probably generally just tended to go for GW Zagrax Earthshade, or something like the Army Painter Strong Tone. I've heard worked quite well, but in this case I ran out of all of that, so I mixed up my own using a bit of burnt umber craft paint, some matte medium, some water, and a drop of dish soap. So it works quite well. It's quite heavy, then tends to pull in the recesses and leaves quite a lot of sediment, but it also actually works to my advantage in that regard, because it also provides a bit of grime and weathering when it dries, which has worked out quite well. You can see it goes on quite thick in places in the video, and it had quite a long drying time as well. So this is probably the longest part of the build and paint process was waiting for that wash to dry, whereas something like the custom designed washes from GW dry quite quickly and you can get on with things. But yeah, like I say, it worked quite well, and I've used it on a few models now, and it gives quite a nice effect. And once the wash has dried, it's on to the kind of final stages of weathering. So I take a bit of sponge from packaging material, and dip that into some Rhino hide, which is the base colour used at the start for the primer, and then I just go roughly over every kind of corner and edge on the model, as well as some bits in the middle as well, just to kind of sell the effect of a bit of chipping. And anywhere that's been gone over with the Rhinox hide, I then do the same process with some lead belcher, to show that it's been chipped right down to the bare metal. Like I say, there's probably better ways of doing this effect. You can do it with a brush, and it'll turn out quite nicely. But this is a really quick and dirty way of doing it, and it does look decent enough. And with that, the Razorback's completed. I'm quite happy with the results. It blends in well with the rest of the army that I'm building. I think there's definitely room for improvement. What I will do is go back later on and dirty up the exhaust vents a little bit, adding a little bit of black soot, drill out the holes in them as well, just to make things look a little bit more realistic. After that, it's on to the second part of the series, where I'll take the Predator kit and build that in the same manner, although I won't actually show that on camera because it's more or less the same process. But what I will do is use parts from that kit as well as parts from the bits box to build additional modules and give some options for fielding different configurations in game. So keep an eye out for that. I'll leave some links in the description below for links to my blog, where you can see past projects and the build up for this. In addition, I'm going to be working on my video editing skills, as I'm currently doing this in Windows photo and video editor, which isn't ideal. I'm trying to get my hands on to get my head around DaVinci Resolve, which I've used a little bit in the past, and definitely yields a better result. This has been a bit of a struggle putting this together inside of the Windows native tools, but it seems to be some sort of iPhone, which I'm recording on, file format issue, getting that into Resolve, so that'll be the next thing to tackle. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again.